Welcome to Boundaries for People Helpers. I was really excited when Megan asked me to take on this subject because I believe boundaries are the linchpin for healthy relationships of all types, as well as an emotionally healthy and satisfying life. When I'm helping a woman or a group of women, the first thing I do is teach boundaries. And everything I teach after that is sprinkled with dashes of boundary training. If you haven't read the book Boundaries by Henry Cloud and John Townsend, I would encourage you to do that before you reach out to help victims. I'll be teaching you some important things about boundaries in relation to helping victims, but I can't come close to covering all the great material in that book. It's actually really dangerous for someone with poor boundaries to reach out and help someone else with poor boundaries. It's dangerous for both of you. So, with that in mind, we're going to be doing two things in today's session. We'll be learning what boundaries are, why they are necessary for both the victim and the helper, and practical ways of implementing boundaries in your protocols for helping victims. And I hope that today's session will impact your personal life in other ways as well, because boundaries help us create beautiful lives. If you go away with only one thing from this session, I would like it to be this. Boundaries are loving. And loving God and loving people, including ourselves, we get to be included in that people category, sums up the whole entire law of God. It is loving to respect and protect your own life and jurisdiction, and to respect and protect the lives and jurisdictions of others. That is love. The victim and her helpers are not responsible for her husband's failure to take responsibility for his behavior. To do that is not loving or respectful of his right to control his own life and jurisdiction and make decisions for himself. By the same token, the victim is responsible for her life and her jurisdiction. And if someone is chronically violating and disrespecting that life and jurisdiction, it is her responsibility to protect and honor her space and say no to the violator. That is loving. Your role as her helper is to help her do this, not help her go back to being violated. When we encourage one another in establishing and holding boundaries, we are being loving and respectful. You can't have loosey-goosey boundaries and love at the same time. Controlling and powering over others is not loving, and allowing yourself to be controlled and powered over by others is also not loving or respecting to yourself or to the power of God at work in you. I used to have terrible boundaries. I let others walk all over me, but I was also resentful of how they took advantage of me. I had a hard time saying no, and when I did, I was riddled with inner guilt for not dying to myself and letting someone else have my time and energy. Learning how to establish and maintain boundaries has literally changed and saved my life. I now believe that one of the sweetest gifts I can give to my own kids is this boundary skill set. It will come in handy in the workplace, the church, at home, and in all of their relationships. The word boundaries may not be in the Bible, but the concept is modeled numerous times, especially by Jesus. Jesus was the most well-boundaried person who ever walked planet Earth. He loved and served people, but he did not let people manipulate him from his laser-focused mission. He didn't chase after people to try to control them or convince them of the truth or tell them what they had to do. He respected their basic human right to choose for themselves. He took responsibility for himself and his work, and he let others decide whether or not they wanted to follow him. When dysfunctional people gnashed their teeth at Jesus, he let them gnash. He didn't try to argue with them or change their minds, and he didn't let their negative opinions stop him from doing what he needed to do. He knew when to eat, when to rest, when to work. He knew when to say, "Yes, I'm coming now," and "No, I will come later." He knew when to work in a carpenter shop and when to do full-time ministry. He didn't let anyone pressure him to do anything he wasn't called by God to do, and yet we know he gave his life for people because he loved them. I think there's some confusion in Christian circles about sacrifice and dying to self and discipleship and how all of that relates to boundaries that ends up causing a lot of relationship problems, burnout, and pain. Jesus didn't model this for us, and I think it's important to understand why we too need to have a wiser approach to loving and serving others. So, what are boundaries? Imagine that every person has a house and yard with a fence around it. Your spouse does, your kids do, your siblings do, your parents do, your friends do, your coworkers do, and so do you. It doesn't matter what color you are, what gender you are, how much money you have, how smart or popular you are, your marital status, or where you live. You've been assigned to your own home and yard. God gave you your house and yard, and he put a fence around it to show you where it ends and where your neighbor's yard begins. The fence is your boundary. God doesn't expect you to water and mow someone else's lawn. However, he does expect you to water and mow yours. It's important to understand the principle that just because two people are married doesn't give either of them free rein to disrespectfully tromp all over the other person's house and yard. Sharing an intimate relationship absolutely requires respect of boundaries. Likewise, just because you are helping someone doesn't mean they get to use you whenever they want to, and it also doesn't mean you get to boss them around because they've turned to you for advice or support. So what happens when someone else leaves their own yard and comes over into yours and starts mowing it for you, and you didn't ask? Someone with poor boundaries might be afraid to say, "Excuse me, but this is my lawn and I'm taking care of it." And what if the other person's response was, "So what? I think you're doing a lousy job here, so I'm going to do it for you. You should be thankful I'm here instead of bossing me around like a smarty pants. Who do you think you are anyway?" They've actually committed a double boundary violation here. One for invading someone else's space, and one for attacking that person when they tried to protect their space. This is what women who live with abusers deal with on a regular basis. I'm going to give you some more real-life examples of how this dynamic works. What if someone leaves their home and walks into yours, uninvited, and begins to read through your private journals? When you point out this boundary violation in an abusive relationship, you would get accused of being selfish, hiding things, not being unified, not trusting the other person, and being mean. This is a double boundary violation, one for the original invasion of your privacy and one for attacking your character when you tried to protect your space. What if someone grabs you, carries you over into their yard, forces you to get into their car, and drives dangerously through town? In an abusive relationship, when you point out this boundary violation, you would get accused of not trusting God, being picky, and being a nag. This is a double boundary violation, one for the original invasion and one for attacking your character when you tried to protect your space. What if you invite someone over for dinner, but they refuse to leave when you ask them? When you point out this boundary violation in an abusive relationship, you get accused of not sharing, being mean, being selfish, and being rude. This is a double boundary violation, one for the original invasion and one for attacking your character when you tried to protect your space. What if someone comes into your house and says that your housekeeping skills are crappy and everything else about you is also crappy? In an abusive relationship, when you point out this boundary violation, you get accused of not taking advice, not being humble, being stuck up, unwilling to learn, and lazy. This is a double boundary violation, one for the original invasion and one for attacking who you are as a person when you try to protect your space. What if you close the door of your house and lock it so the boundary violator can't get in anymore to hurt you, and your pastor comes marching through your garden gate, bangs on your front door, and informs you that you aren't a Christian and he never wants to see you in his church again unless you allow the boundary violator to do whatever he wants to do to your person, your garden, and your house? This is a double boundary violation, one for the original invasion and one for spiritually abusing you when you tried to protect your space. Have you ever gone over into someone else's yard and said, "I don't think you should plant the roses there. They won't get enough sun and they'll die. I know better than you, and I'm not going to wait for you to ask for my advice because I need to take care of you and make sure nothing bad ever happens to your garden so that you're not unhappy." Or do you ever find yourself feeling like you are required to come over and mow someone else's lawn every week because if you don't, who will? And if it doesn't get mowed, the other person will be annoyed or upset, so get on with it. Or do you ever feel resentful of all the neighbors who feel free to walk inside your house with muddy feet, yet you instinctively know that if you ask them to leave, they'd get mad and you'd feel like a big old meanie? Or do you ever feel angry that your gate always has to be open to everyone in order to keep them all happy? But when you try to go into someone else's yard, they get upset with you? Do you see how bad boundaries go both ways? You might think that doing good to someone and helping them or saving them when they haven't asked is actually a good crossing of boundaries. But it's not. It might feel good, but it is ultimately not good for you or for the other person. So many of us do that, believing that we're doing people a huge favor, and we're confused about why they don't appreciate it. Here's something you need to write down on a sticky note and put on your bathroom mirror. You are not responsible for anyone else's life. You're not responsible for their growth, for their change, for their happiness, for their peace, for their anything. When you are dealing with other adults, you each get to be responsible for only one person's house and yard, and that's your own. So let's sum this up. Your boundaries need some work if you let others take over your property management, and your boundaries need some work if you think it's okay to take over the property management of someone else's property. Healthy boundaries mean that you stick to your house and yard, and you get to decide who comes over and when and why. And healthy boundaries also mean that you don't cross over into someone else's house or yard unless you are invited, their initiative, and you only go if you decide that you can. In other words, you don't allow anyone to force you to come over into their territory. So, I hope this lays a solid foundational understanding about how boundaries work. We're going to refer back to this metaphor of the house and yard representing our individual lives and boundaries throughout this session. So the next section that we're going to be talking about is why are boundaries important when helping victims. We're going to talk about both the victim and the helper and how the concept of people-pleasing or controlling tendencies interfere with healthy boundaries. Victims of domestic abuse are stuck because they have had or currently have a difficult time with boundaries. Victims struggle with wanting to please people and bring joy and happiness into the lives of others. One of the reasons they are in so much pain is because someone in their lives is taking advantage of their people-pleasing tendencies. They have spent years, often decades, trying to please their spouse and their church and their friends and their family of origin. Because of their poor boundaries, they give and give and give, often getting in return only criticism and more demands. And they are depleted in their minds and their bodies and their souls. They are desperate for help and respite. They want and need to be loved for who they are, not for what they do and what they can give. I remember when some people at my former church began to reach out to me. I was not used to getting help from anyone, and I felt obligated to give back, to pay them back for their help and support. So I did silly things like sending them free products from my business. I made soap at the time and sold it. I would gush with thank yous. I could not get it out of my mind that I would owe them something if they helped me, and that included owing them my allegiance and my obedience or agreement with whatever they decided for me. Now, since it was my life on the line, I desperately needed them to see my problem and help me fix it. I didn't realize that I was an adult, perfectly capable of fixing my own problem if I would just take control of my life and make some hard decisions on my own. So please be aware that a victim could be feeling those things. They will need reassurance that you are supporting them because you believe them and care about them as a person, that you do not have an agenda, and that your support is not going to disappear if they don't do what you want them to do. Your support is unconditional with no strings attached. Now, people helpers love to help people too. That's why they do what they do. But they also love to please people, to bring happiness and joy into the lives of others. And there is nothing wrong with that. Your challenge will be to give of yourself in such a way that you don't burn out. You don't want to be like a fireworks display that gives everything for a few minutes, but then has nothing left to give when it's all over. You want to be more like a campfire that burns indefinitely, that offers warmth and light for the long haul. Helping people is a marathon. It's not a sprint. Healthy boundaries are going to help you feed that campfire so that you can help others for a long time without burning out. Keep in mind, whenever you are helping someone, that both people, the helper and the victim, are going to bring a biased understanding of the other person to the table. And it isn't always very accurate. That's what we're going to be talking about next, this bias that we bring to the table. This bias is part of being human and growing up with a certain part of the world, in a certain part of the world, with a specific set of beliefs and experiences that are unique to each person. You can't do or think or say anything without some kind of bias. Getting completely rid of bias is not realistic, but becoming aware of your bias so that you can be more open to the perspectives of others is realistic and it's necessary. So let's talk about the helper's bias first of all. Men and women have a certain inbred stereotypical view about one another that's not actually rooted in reality of the human being that's actually in front of them. If you are a man helping a woman, you may have an idea, even if it's not conscious, that women tend to be emotional and over-exaggerate their pain or their circumstances. Now, I hope you don't have that unconscious belief, but if you do, that would be pretty normal. This unconscious bias may color your perspective as she is sharing her reality with you, and you may be tempted to say things that will minimize her experience. If you do this, it's going to actually re-traumatize her, because this is the very nature of her experience with an abuser. Her abuser does exactly that, minimizes his behavior and its effect on her. She's already struggling with confusion about whether or not she's even being abused. That's a very strong word, and to admit that is something that she's experiencing. It's very difficult for her at first. Women who are being physically beaten struggle with that, and so do women who are being emotionally beaten. That's one of the crazy, subtle, complex problems that abuse causes. So if you are confused about it as well, you will not be able to help her, but you will actually contribute to her problem in a profoundly damaging way. But let's say that you're a woman helping a victim. Don't think you are not also in danger of bringing a bias to the table. If you have never experienced emotional, physical, financial, or spiritual abuse, you may not have a good grasp of how this dynamic plays out in the physical brain, mind, emotions, and body of the victim. You may filter her experience through your grid of experience. So when she describes a seemingly benign incident, you may process that in terms of something similar that you experienced that wasn't really abusive in a different circumstance. You may view yourself as being better able to handle conflict, or wiser at seeing things more clearly, or more skilled at navigating relational communication problems. And you may be all of those things. But you need to remember that intelligence, skill, wisdom, insight, and amazing communication skills are all completely ineffective at dealing with an abuser or dealing with abuse. You need to remember that if God had allowed you to be in the victim's shoes, you would not have been able to solve her problems any better than she has been able to. And that's because she doesn't live with a normal human being with garden variety marriage or communication problems. She lives with an abuser. It's a completely different dynamic. Keep in mind that getting out of an abusive relationship takes a long time and a tremendous amount of emotional energy. It is exhausting on many levels. It's like trying to swim across a high raging river. Your body is being tossed and turned and you don't know up from down half the time. When you barely get a footing, it slips away. There's a lot of pain. You're grieving. You feel as if your world is falling apart, because it is. Many of your friends and family are not supportive, so you also feel alone and full of fear. When someone throws you a life ring, you're going to grab on and you're going to pull. You are just desperate for help, and you may not be thinking about the person on the other end of that life ring. Just like a woman in labor might swear at her partner while she's in the middle of a contraction, so a victim may get triggered by a people helper and lash out at them or react in emotionally triggered ways. Helping them will take strength of character on your part and a strong sense of who you are in Christ. In one counseling session that I experienced, I was begging this experienced Christian counselor not to make me go over my own sin again in front of my husband, because that was what was going to make things a lot worse for me at home then. So I tried to explain to this counselor that I had spent years focused on my sins and begging forgiveness, while my husband blamed me for everything that he ever did or said. When I kept insisting with a very panicked and triggered voice that I did not want to do that anymore, the counselor leaned in close to me and said, "I can understand why your husband feels the way he does about you. You are like a jackhammer, hammering away at what you believe to be true. It makes me want to run a million miles away from you." I began sobbing uncontrollably as I gathered my things and left. I couldn't stay at that point. And while I drove home, it was raining that day. All I could think about was how I should just drive my van into the ditch of the freeway. How I wasn't worth helping. I was a hopeless cause. In another counseling experience, this was with a less experienced female counselor from my church at the time, she told me that I was not being abused and that she knew what abuse was because she had taken women who were black and blue to abuse shelters. And that was abuse. Now, when I tried to hold my husband accountable, she told me that I was being unkind and unforgiving. She also told me that she would only help me if I agreed never to get a divorce. So her help was conditional upon my doing and thinking and speaking as she told me to do and think and speak. I give you both of these examples to show you what happens when someone brings their own bias and their own need to control the situation to the table. When you are working with a victim, your main job is to listen and validate and support, not to insult and blame and shame and control them. Even if the woman was the true abuser, pretending to be the victim, the rules still apply. Think about it. Abusers get to make their own decisions too. Their house and yard belongs to them. It doesn't belong to you or to anyone else. If they are not surrendered to Jesus Christ, that's between them and Jesus. Again, it's not your place to make them have an epiphany and get right with God. You can certainly pray for that, but you can't force that on another person. Both an abuser and a victim are going to go through your little hoops if it gets them what they believe they need and want. And that is not real change. That's fake, and it doesn't last. Real change is sought after and motivated from within a person. So you do your part and let God do his, and let the other person decide for themselves. At the end of the day, we have to remember that the other person is the one that has to live with their decisions. I know women who stayed another 10 years with their abuser because someone at church told them to do that. And the results in their life and the lives of their kids have been devastating. And where is the person who told them to do that? They've gone on their merry way. They don't have to live with the fallout. So let people make decisions for themselves. Again, we are called to love, not to power over others. And this is just a basic boundary issue. Now let's talk about the victim's bias, because she's going to come to you with a biased perspective as well. She will tend to view you as her rescuer, someone who can do something to solve her problem. She is naturally going to put you on a pedestal that you probably don't belong on, and you'll be tempted to enjoy being put there and to take advantage of that feeling of power and control over her life and decision-making process. It is critical and an exercise of healthy, mature boundaries on your part that you don't accept that position. It's better to let her know very clearly up front that she doesn't need a rescuer. She needs to be personally empowered to make her own choices about her life. The reason she is stuck is because someone else is controlling her thoughts, her decisions, and her life. And the last thing she needs is to transfer all of that responsibility over to another human being. That would be like you telling her to have the other guy get out of her yard so that you can come in and mow her lawn instead. You need to teach her how to mow her own lawn and take care of her own rose garden so that you can get back to the business of taking care of yours. The roles of the helper and the victim are not a one-up and a one-down role. Nobody is on a pedestal in this story. In God's eyes, we are neighbors. People love to think this is just human nature. We love to think in terms of who's better, who's smarter, who has more of this or that, who is more gifted, who can do this or that, who is the helper and who is the victim, and we think of one as being higher than the other. But before you can effectively help anyone, you need to see the victim as your equal, your neighbor, because in reality, in God's reality, that's exactly who she is. Just because she is the victim of an abusive individual's power and control over her doesn't make her less than anyone else. Most victims I know are extremely intelligent, gifted, talented human beings in their own right. They made a bad decision when they were in their youth, and then they did everything they could to make it work. And now they need some support while they work on solving that problem so they don't have to spend the rest of their lives in hell. One of the worst feelings I had getting help from a wide variety of people helpers over the years was realizing every single time that they viewed me as someone who was beneath them. I felt it from both men and women, old people and young people, professional Christian counselors and lay helpers. I was determined that if God ever gave me the blessing of walking alongside other victims, that I would treat their human soul and their story with respect and honor. The Bible teaches us to view others as better than ourselves, not the other way around. So I believe coming into this role as a helper requires looking at that person and their story, their home and yard, as a sacred space and respecting that space with honor and love. You've been invited in. This is not your right. It is your privilege to be there. I want to talk a little bit about authority now. I'm hoping that this is beginning to come together for you. Just quick take a drink here. And I'm just going to quick make sure this is recording because I would hate to, I think it is. I hate to think I got halfway through and it wasn't recording. Here's the thing. The big hang up for women of faith is that they have sometimes been taught that boundaries are okay, except when you're married. Then your husband is in authority over your house and yard, and they have the final say. So if you are an unmarried woman, in some circles, your authority or the person in charge of your house and yard is your dad or your pastor. And if you're married, it's your husband. I'd like to read a quote for you that was written by Wade Burleson in his book, Fraudulent Authority, and it goes like this. The Bible teaches that men and women should be servants of all, and nobody should seek or desire to have moral or spiritual authority over anyone. Evangelical men seem infatuated with obtaining this spiritual authority and preventing women from having it. The problem is their infatuation with spiritual authority. In New Testament scriptures, Jesus Christ is the head, the sole authority over every single believer regarding spiritual life and moral well-being. Each believer in Jesus Christ, both male and female, is a priest unto God, i.e. the priesthood of the believer, modeling for the world what it means to walk with God. Christians serve one another, encourage one another, and help one another. But the moment somebody tries to take a position of spiritual authority over another person, he or she has crossed a line in terms of New Testament Christianity. That's the end of the quote. One of the most destructive pieces of propaganda, I believe, that are used to keep women in a power under position related to men is this idea of authority, and more specifically that men have authority over women. This takes the responsibility and control of a woman's life, meaning her home and yard, away from her. Do you see how this is a direct boundaries issue? And is this really God's design for the human race? The issue of authority of men over women negatively affects so many facets of life. R. Stark writes, the belief that authority is ontologically attached to personhood, particularly manhood, will shape the way you view any number of issues our country is focused on today. Domestic abuse, clerical abuse, police brutality, and civil disobedience. It will shape the way you interpret America's troubling legacy of slavery and segregation, its lingering effects, and the Protestant church's passive complicity and active participation in it. There was no power over system in the Garden of Eden. Power over was a result of sin, and the New Testament teaches us that eliminating power over in Christian relationships was one of the hallmarks of Jesus' sacrifice on the cross. But for some reason, there are still a few Christian teachers who believe that the world's power over system is also appropriate for the Church of Jesus Christ. But God's kingdom is not a power over system for anyone. Mark 10:42-45 says, and Jesus called them to him and said to them, you know that those who are considered rulers of the Gentiles lord it over them, and their great ones exercise authority over them. But it shall not be so among you. But whoever would be great among you must be your servant, and whoever would be first among you must be slave of all. For even the Son of Man came not to be served, but to serve and to give his life as a ransom for many. Now, of course, there is legal authority in our world, but legal authority actually exists also to serve those under their jurisdiction. So police officers serve their cities. A president serves his or her country. A teacher serves his or her students. That's how it should work when it's functioning in a healthy way. Here's how that might look related to boundaries. Our job as parents in authority over our children is to help them grow up by learning how to take care of and manage their own homes and yards, right? You've successfully done your job if your children become adults who take responsibility for themselves. If your children are still expecting you or someone else to mow their grass and wash their dishes, then you've got some work to do. And it isn't mowing and washing. It's getting out of their homes and yard, meaning out of their business, so they can discover what happens when they don't mow. You might not want them to experience the pain of an ugly yard, but if they don't experience that pain, they'll never be motivated to mow for themselves. So get out of the way. Likewise, the role of any authority is to help those around him or her take responsibility for their own homes and yards. So if someone breaks the law, a police officer gives a fine or makes an arrest. This teaches the lawbreaker to tend to his or her own house and yard and leave the houses and yards of others alone. God created Adam and Eve as equals. They are both under the authority of God, who teaches us to take care of our own homes and yards. When they sinned against God, God held each one personally responsible for their own sin, not for the sins of the other one. He gave them their own custom-made consequence as a result. He didn't punish Adam for Eve's sin and vice versa. In every description of a pastor or elder, and in every example the Bible gives of what a pastor or elder does, the emphasis is on serving and helping where service and help are needed. The emphasis is not on control and power over, ever. Men and women who follow Jesus Christ have one authority, and that's Jesus Christ. They bow to him alone and answer to him alone. Matthew 28:18 says, "And Jesus came and said to them, 'All authority in heaven and on earth has been given to me.'" And Acts 5:29 says, "But Peter and the apostles answered, 'We must obey God rather than men.'" I think we'd be missing something crucial if we didn't talk about the role of the Holy Spirit in this process. He has boundaries as well. He doesn't force himself on anyone. He doesn't force anyone to change or make certain decisions. He comforts and convicts both the people helper and the victim for themselves, not for the other one. In other words, the Holy Spirit is not going to tell you what the victim should do. He will lead the victim. Your job is to trust God enough to do his job. Your job is a supporting role, not a controlling role. You want to be invested, but not so much that you become enmeshed with the other person so that their decisions have a personal effect on you and your life. This is where many Christian churches get it all wrong. They impose their personal beliefs about separation and divorce onto the victim, leaving her caught between two controlling forces, unable to actually hear the Holy Spirit directly for her own life due to the biased perspectives and beliefs and attitudes of all these other people speaking far too loudly in her space. Okay, now we're going to talk about the practical boundary protocols that you can have in place to protect both you and the victim. First of all, let's talk about practical boundaries for the victim that you're going to want to both model and help her implement. First of all, she doesn't need to be rescued. She needs to be empowered. And we've touched on this a little bit already, but this concept was huge for me. I had been literally begging people around me to rescue me. Why would I do that? Because I believed they were the adults and I was the child that needed rescuing. When I first learned this truth, everything was illuminated and it finally clicked. I didn't need the permission of all my mommies and daddies, meaning my husband, my friends, my church leaders, to change my life for the better. I was an adult woman and I had a responsibility before God to make my own decisions about my safety and emotional and spiritual well-being. Just knowing and understanding this empowered me to stop complaining about my lot in life and stop looking to others to change that and begin taking steps in a new direction in spite of the abusive kickback that I ended up getting from everyone around me. Secondly, you're going to want to help the victim learn how to tolerate the disapproval of people instead of feeling like a miserable nothing if someone doesn't like what she does. Again, this was a paradigm shift in my life. I had never learned this skill, but it's the key to being an adult. Nobody can make everyone happy, right? I mean, no matter what we do, there's always going to be someone out there who disapproves, and they're probably going to let us know. This is uncomfortable, but it really is okay if people are unhappy with what we decide. The victim's going to be okay even without the approval of everyone in her life. Now, the child inside of us wants everyone to think that we're good and right, but that's just not possible. We need to let go of this childlike pursuit of people-pleasing and accept the fact that sometimes our decisions are going to make other people angry. This is another boundaries issue, and it isn't our place to manage the emotions of other people. If they are angry, they need to manage their own discomfort. Maybe they believe they have a right to come into the victim's home and yard and control what she plants in her flower garden. And when she tells them that they don't, they may not like that. But that's not her problem. That's theirs. Number 3, she needs to learn how to take full responsibility for herself and let go of the responsibility that she feels that she needs to take for her spouse or for the marriage. At the end of the day, the only person she's going to be able to control is herself, and she can only do her part to help a marriage grow and thrive. She can't do the parts of both herself and her spouse. You're going to want to help her to see that. When she takes back power over herself, she's going to be taking on the role of a mature adult. And something wonderful begins to happen when she learns that she has full responsibility for herself, along with the power to manage her own life by herself on her own. This, again, is basic to adulthood. A healthy marriage requires 2 mature adults committed to mutual love and respect, and she is only one half of that equation. Number 4, you will want to help her take back her dignity as a daughter of God. That her voice counts, her ideas count, her experience counts, her skills count. She needs to learn how to accept herself and respect herself. Why? Because God accepts and respects her. This inner strength is going to give her the motivation and power to stand alone against those who want to tear her down and grind her into dust under their boots. She doesn't have to believe their lies about her. She can stand in the dignity that Jesus has robed her with as his redeemed one. Now, those who are aligned with her Heavenly Father are going to honor her as a sister, and those who aren't, won't. But their reviling lips are not going to say anything of significance to her, and you're going to help her to see that she has the option to listen to those voices or not. Number 5, you want to help her let go of her desire for things to be different. She has this dream of how she hoped that her marriage would be, but now she's got a reality, and the sooner that she accepts that reality, the sooner she's going to be able to make adult decisions about that reality. We all have a great capacity for wishful thinking, but wishful thinking is a childlike behavior, and it prevents us from problem solving and creating strategies that are based on what's actually going on in our lives. Adults make hard decisions based on honest assessments of reality. It's going to be tempting for her to listen to the voices of other magical thinkers and dreamers in her life. You want to make sure that you are not one of those magical thinkers and dreamers that is telling her that, oh, things will work out and God can do anything, and if you just pray hard enough, God's going to turn this whole thing around. You don't want to be that way for her. Christians are especially prone to offering cliches and truisms rather than wise counsel rooted in an honest assessment of harsh realities. But remember that while some may want to help and may have good intentions, they were not given her life, and they don't live in her world, and God isn't going to give them direction or wisdom on her behalf. They may claim otherwise, but this is just the truth. When we are deeply involved in groups or organizations, we might childishly buy into what those around us say is right or true because it's the path of least resistance. It's the least scary thing. We don't want to buck the system or make waves. That's how we stay accepted in the group. And while it's good to get wise counsel, not everyone has wise counsel to give. Foolish counsel rests on a foundation of propaganda with a desire to control. So one of her opportunities moving forward is going to be learning how to discern fantasy from reality. And this often means standing alone against the pressure of others to do what they want her to do. Number 6, she needs to learn how to lean on the strengths and endurance that she's built up through years of being in a toxic marriage. Her survival experience in enduring and persevering through chronic emotional abuse has made her stronger than she could ever imagine. And this experience is going to be the power behind her new growth as an adult woman. Adulting is messy, and she is going to make mistakes along the way, but it is okay for her to make mistakes. She needs to ignore the temptation to accept and internalize the criticism of others, as well as add to their negative voices by criticizing herself when this happens. You're going to help her resist this temptation by reminding her of who she is, that she's a human being who has the right to learn and grow and make mistakes along the way. She is a dearly beloved daughter of the king, and he looks on her with the same love when she messes up as when she's got it all together. He is nothing like her abuser or her critics. 7, you want to help her learn how to stand alone. This means detaching from toxic relationships and belief systems. As she sets healthy boundaries, she is going to discover that many of her relationships were rooted in what she could give to those other people rather than being relationships of mutual love and respect. Some of those people are not going to want to be her friend anymore, and that's going to hurt her. She's going to go through a lot of grieving, but she needs to know that she's not going to be alone forever. She will eventually begin to attract other adults who can offer her mutual love and respect without taking advantage of her or using her. You want to be one of those safe people. Once she breaks out of this suffocating bubble of someone else's poisonous lies, her head is going to begin to clear, and she's going to be able to learn and grow as the adult woman God made her to be. So here's some just bullet points that she needs to learn. She needs to respect her own experience and voice. She needs to learn how to forgive herself, trust her gut, be open to learning new things, be free to change her mind, be free to make choices, be willing to stand alone, knowing that she is never alone, develop her strengths and accept her weaknesses, spend time with healthy, wise people, limit her time with controlling, abusive people, try not to justify or explain herself, no longer pursue the approval of others, including you. She needs to be good with herself just the way she is, replace anger and frustration with peace, have clarity about what is hers. Oh, these are some of the benefits. I'm sorry, I segued into some of the benefits that she will have to her life, okay? And that is that she will, if she does these things, she will replace anger and frustration with peace. She will have clarity about what is hers and what isn't. She'll experience a new sense of power and control over her own space and life. She will grow in greater self-awareness. She'll grow in greater respect for herself and others. She'll experience a deeper sense of safety. She will experience freedom from feeling responsible for managing everyone else's life. She'll have more time to do what's important to her. She'll become less judgmental of others and their boundaries. She will learn to expect less from others, and she'll be able to love and accept them the way they are. Because that's just what happens. When you love and accept yourself the way you are, you love and accept others the way they are. And she'll be able to go from being an abuse victim to being an abuse survivor, and then go into being a woman who's actually thriving. When she embraces her new role as an adult woman, the balance in her family system and her religious community is going to be disrupted, and the various players are going to react in different ways in an attempt to bring back the status quo. You do not want to be part of that disruption. You want to be someone who's going to be stable and be a support to her when this happens. Abusers and abusive people hate boundaries. It's all about the boundaries for them, because when they don't have when the boundaries have been set up and she set up healthy boundaries, they no longer have power and control over her life. So your opportunity is going to be to help her continue to exercise the boundaries that she establishes. But what about you? You need to actually set up boundaries for yourself as well when you're helping. So here are some practical boundaries for you as the people helper. First of all, before you even begin, you need to assess the margin that you have in your life right now. People helpers tend to bite off more than they can chew. You need to have enough margin in your life to accommodate for normal physical illness that comes on us now and then, for our family members and their activities, for our primary responsibilities, and for other unexpected things that come into our lives here and there that require our time and attention. If you do an assessment and you realize that you have time to help a victim through her specific set of circumstances, make sure that you think through what you have to offer, when, and for how long. And then you'll want to communicate this clearly to her up front so she knows what she can expect from the relationship. Victims have often been picked up, used, and then discarded many times in their lives. A lot of times people helpers, they want to help people, but then they burn out and then they discard the person they're trying to help. This is very re-traumatizing for a victim, and they don't need a rerun. When you are clear in your mind about what your commitment level is and you communicate that clearly to her, you lessen the risk of her feeling that you've promised something that you're never going to be able to deliver. And this protects both you and her. Here are some questions that you can ask yourself. What is the best way that you want to communicate with this person? Do you want to use a phone? Do you want to use texting? Do you want to keep it in person? You can use Voxer. I've been using Voxer with some people that I've been helping, where you can leave it. It's like a walkie-talkie where you leave a message and then they can pick up the message at their convenience and then they can leave another message. It's kind of like voice texting, really. Email, or a combination of these. Another question to ask is, what days of the week are you going to be available and what hours of those days? So in other words, do you want to be available for a phone call on weekends, but then she can reach out to you via text or email on the weekdays? Do you want to have a set time where you meet in person once per week? Make sure that you've thought through this carefully before moving forward. Once you have your schedule set up, you're going to feel better about being able to say no if she begins to impose on your personal time. And hopefully a schedule or a set idea and some parameters that are set up in advance, hopefully that will prevent that from happening in the first place. Another question is, decide how long you're going to be able to assist her and what that help looks like. If she needs a place to stay, for example, and you have a room in your basement, you would want to decide in advance how long she can stay and whether or not you or someone else can assist her in finding a more permanent place within a certain amount of time. If you're going to oversee a financial fund that will help her get back on her feet, decide what that financial limit will be, as well as the time limit. I know people who've run into problems with the victim having unrealistic expectation because things weren't communicated up front. And when that happens, you've got a mess on your hands. Also, think about who is going to be your backup in case you get pulled out of the picture for emergency reasons or for whatever reason. You don't want to be doing this in a vacuum. It's better if there's actually a team of people that are working together. Everyone is going to have days or weeks that get crazy, and you don't want the victim to feel abandoned during this traumatic time in her life. And you also don't want her solely dependent on one person for her well-being. Here are some examples of things that you can't do or shouldn't do. You're not going to be able, you have no control over making her pain go away. You're not going to be able to make her pain go away. So don't think that you're helping her is going to do that. You're not going to be able to solve her problem for her. You're not going to be able to make sure that she makes decisions that are going to set her up for success in life. She may make decisions that you completely disagree with. And that is her right, and that's how she makes mistakes and learns. You're not going to be able to monitor her spiritual health. That's her responsibility between her and God. You're not going to be able to, you shouldn't overtly or covertly threaten to withhold your help if she doesn't do what you think she should do, unless she is violating your boundaries and won't stop when you ask her. Okay, so then I wouldn't call it a threat, but I would say if she's violating your boundaries, you can say, if you continue to do this, such and such, then I will need to do, if you do A, B, and C, I will need to do D, E, and F in order to protect my own life. Okay, but otherwise, don't threaten it. Like, so what I experienced that I mentioned earlier is, if you don't do this and this, then we're not going to help you anymore, or we're going to lecture you about this, or we're going to not be calling you, or we're going to give you the silent treatment. Those were all different things that I experienced if I didn't do what the people that were trying to help me wanted me to do. Think about Job's helpers. They were full of advice and not full of compassion. And so you don't want to be like that. You want to be sensitive to the fact that these women have been told what to do for decades. And your voice is probably not a new one to them. You probably aren't going to say anything profoundly new that they haven't heard a million times before. Unless it's, I care about you and I'd love to pray for you. And I have some suggestions of things you can say to a victim that are much more helpful than giving them a lecture. You also don't want to avoid them in public. If you avoid them at church or avoid them in public, they are going to notice. I guarantee it. And they're going to feel that. You want to be going out of your way to reach out to them and let them know that you care. Don't say, here's some things you don't want to say. There must be something wrong with you that inspires your husband to treat you poorly. By the way, these are all things that I heard and that others I've talked to have heard. Let me start over again. There must be something wrong with you that inspires your husband to treat you poorly. You should figure that out before God and fix it. God will give you the strength and the grace to do this. Are you praying about this? Are you trusting God? He can fix your husband, but you might need to have a little more faith. Focus on the good things and be grateful for what you have. Nobody's marriage is perfect. If my husband did that to me, I'd never put up with it. Why do you? You always were too sensitive, even as a child. I think you expect too much of relationships. You expect them to be all romance, except real life, honey. Please don't talk about your marriage problems with us. God says not to gossip, and we want to honor God. So here's what you can do. You can, and what you have control over. You can be a good listener. You can validate their experience. When you see them in public, you can reach out and say hi and let them know that you're praying for them. You can ask them questions to help them discover their own ability to make good decisions. You can read good books about abuse. I wrote one that I think covers just about every angle you can think of. It's called Is It Me? Making Sense of Your Confusing Marriage, A Christian Woman's Guide to Hidden Emotional and Spiritual Abuse. I had hundreds of victims help me write that book, so it gives us as accurate of an understanding of abuse as any I've read, and I've read well over 100 books on this subject. You could say, I'm sorry that you're in such a deep pain. Would you like to talk about it? When your husband does that, how does it make you feel? How can I pray more specifically for you? What can I do to help you right now? I don't know much about this kind of thing. Do you know where I can learn more so I can better understand what you're going through? I believe you. I can't imagine going through what you've been through. Tell me more. What about just being a friend and taking them out to dinner? What about helping them drive their children all over the place? I know victims who are basically single parenting and being whipped around by their husband and not being helped at all, and they've got all the responsibilities of their children on their shoulders and nobody's helping them. What about coming over and cleaning their house for them? What about putting a bag of groceries by their front door, or bringing them a cake or a pie and letting them know that you care about them and you're thinking of them and praying for them? I had people that not only didn't do those things but actually told their children that they could no longer play with my children anymore. So we want to be doing the opposite of that. We want to be loving them and reaching out to them and supporting them, not ostracizing them and shunning them. We want to support the decisions that they make, letting them know that even if they make a mistake, that's how we do our greatest learning. Have we made mistakes? Yes, we have. Are we perfect people? No, we're not. I remember walking on eggshells around the people that were helping me, and I eventually realized that for me to continue getting support from them, I had to be very careful not to say or do anything that might offend any of them. And each of them had their own personality, and a lot of times abuse victims are very sensitive, emotionally sensitive to the emotional environment around them. We're picking up on subtle hidden cues that other people are giving off, and we're trying very hard to manage all of these emotions of other people so we don't offend them. I had to buy into their narrative of what was going on. And unfortunately, they were getting their narrative from my abuser. So I was ultimately faced with this choice to either continue getting help from folks who didn't believe me or walk away and figure out life on my own between God and me. I ended up choosing the latter. And it was this decision that jump-started my journey toward establishing an adult life of healthy boundaries. I did lose a lot of family and friends during that purging time in my life, but I also ended up making newer, healthy friends, meeting up again with older friends that I grew up with that were healthy. I got remarried to a healthy man, and I found a new inner peace and joy in not pandering to the whims of everyone around me. That's what boundaries is. When you establish your own healthy boundaries up front and you model this for the victim and encourage her to do the same, you're going to find that your help is a powerful launch pad for her to begin her own healing journey. In order to heal, abuse victims need compassionate support and empowerment to take back